to meet you through the screen. The plague has lately struck, and we are obliged to stay home. But I enter your home, and I invite you to share with me this moment. We will keep working, studying, and we will be back, inshallah, okay? And today, I would like to continue teaching and studying with you. And that's why I'm going today to introduce the course on critical theory, which is meant to introduce and discuss the critical approaches that could be adopted in reading, criticizing, and analyzing a piece of literature. And as we say today, my presentation is on biographical approach. I'd like to present the premises upon which it is based, the strategies adopted, and we'll discuss the limitations and the reservations concerning this approach. As the title shows, biography seems to be a key criterion in this mode of criticism. That is to say, the author, the writer, or the producer, that is the person who, in relation to the text produced. And before discussing the issue, I would like to take you back to the previous chapter on the Greeks' theorization of art to make the connection between the theoretical points and the approach we are to discuss. And of course, when I talk about the Greeks, two prominent figures come to mind. I mean Aristotle and Plato. And Plato, in his definition of art, his poetics, he seems to put art as an imitation, and then puts the mimetic dimension as an important factor in the production of art. He also puts art in relation to history, and that's puts the artist above the historian, since the artist comes after where the historian stops. That is to say, he moves from the particular events through names to the universal. And the artist somehow disappears dealing with universal and artistic means. Also, Aristotle put art in relation to philosophy, so it is a source of knowledge. And at the end, as we see, the artist or the author here is somehow superior in position in relation to the historian, the philosophers, and in his aim to universality. That is to say, at the end we see that the artist is put, according to Aristotle, in a superior position. On the opposite, opposed to Aristotle's conception of art, Plato thinks that what is imitated is false, and believes that reality is unreachable somewhere else. And art then is a false representation, and then artist is a liar. That is to say, a negative position. That's why he bans the artist and advocates censorship, since art, according to Plato, is not morally edifying. So the moral factor is very important here. The same story is somehow reiterated later between Philip Sidney in the 16th century in his defense of poetry and the Puritans who ban art. The polemical situation of the artists and the poets here, I say this because we need to study the author's place in a text. And that is to say, I'm talking about the academic handling of literature. In explaining, reading, as I said, and critical piece, we need a form of perspective, an angle from which we could better analyze the piece of literature. And that is to say, adopt a critical approach. And here I have, broadly speaking, two critical perspectives, what I can classify as extrinsic and intrinsic. The extrinsic here means that we go outside the text and we borrow from other fields of knowledge, biography, sociology, philosophy, psychology, and so on, and mythology, to read the text in the light of the principles of the other areas and to criticize the text, trying to bring light to the texts, relying on other areas of study. The other approach is intrinsic, and we will see it later. It relies much more on the internal features of the text, and the intrinsic approach believes in the fact that the text is self-sufficient, self-contained, and the linguistic devices are enough in reading and training the text. And in this series of presentations, we're going to go through these approaches, the biographical, the moral, the psychological, the archetypal, and we will adopt the same procedure, that is to say, we will deal with the premises upon which they are based, strategies, techniques, and think of limitations. And today, the first, as I said here, the first question that we ask is that who writes? That is to say, the relation of the author to the text, and how far the author's biography help in reading the text or a piece of literature, and we see what is gained and what is lost. That is to say, the author principle here, and the following aspects here tell us that, first of all, that this approach is extrinsic. It is to say, we go to think and to read the biography of the author in order to bring light to the text. It is an old method. It is extensively employed by Samuel Johnson in Lives of the Most Eminent English Poets, as an example. It is a form of criticism that explains literature in terms of the personality and life of the writer. It studies aspects of author's life and its manifestation in the text. It thinks that the truth of the text corresponds to the author's life. And this is a big question here. I can ask how far that the truth of the author's life is parallel to the truth of the text. It also shows the relevance of the author's life in understanding the text. These are general things that we have to take in account when we think about the biographical approach. What do we benefit from these? First, that facts of the author's life could help explain and interpret the text. It appreciates the text better, knowing writers' struggles and difficulties in creating the text. Understand writers' preoccupation, studying the way they apply, modify their life experience. So you can see that all the things, all the elements necessary for understanding are taken from the author's life. I start with an example here, which is taken from Edgar Allan Poe, poets. Once upon midnight, dreary while I pondered, weak and weary, over many quaint and curious while in forgotten lore. A famous poem by Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven. As a poet, as a poem, and as a writer, as a poet, we can see the sadness, the mournful feelings of the poet in the poem, and we can see probably a correspondence between the feeling of the poet in mourning his little beloved Leonore, who died of tuberculosis in 1847, and we can see that Edgar Allan Poe is haunted by the idea of death, as it is same thing in his poem Annabelle. The correspondence is easily taken, but how far the idea of death is prominent in all his stories and how far we can move from what is personal into what is much more philosophical about the idea of the death and what is left in the human spirit. Other examples, probably in a poem we can see that we can read the poem as a symbolical elegy on the death of his beloved Lenore. But when I take examples of fiction, I take example I have here, Charles Dickens, David Copperfield, Great Expectations. I can see that when I bring the author's biography, in order to read David Copperfield and Great Expectations, so it's possible. I can see that Dickens reworks his childhood, for example, Great Expectation, first-person narrative, where he writes life experience of Pip. The idea of the orphan is in both novels. Copperfield endures hardships of mother's death. The opening chapters of Great Expectations is in the cemetery where Pip is looking for the dead parents. So there are many parts of the life of Dickens probably in the novel. And it is possible. But when we read these texts in the light of the author's Charles Dickens' biography, there are other things that we miss. It is in the 19th century, there are a life of class, social advancements, affection, loyalty, conscience. There are more important issues which are much more universal. And I'll come back to these ideas here. I can pick up, for example, Virginia Woolf to the Right House. And Virginia Woolf wrote her diaries. And we can see the relation between her life, herself, and her father, Mr. Stephen. And we can see also that the Right House is based on family life, and the plot is that of the parents. Mr. Ramsay, an image of the father image, negatively presented as the intellectual. Difficult again, because as a novel we cannot see the modernist dimension of the novel, the psychological parts, and also the notion of the consciousness and time, the time of the Freudian psychology, the Bergson's notion of internal time, and so on and so on. Also, when I take, for example, Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man of the Sea, which was written in 1952, we see the depths of the novel, the philosophical depths, and it can be from a biographical perspective when we see that Hemingway, after his failure in 1950, writing his novel Across the River, probably the story that is The Old Man of the Sea can be read as an allegory of Hemingway's own life as a writer. So this can be fighting against failure, and that's how we can read The Old Man of the Sea. But when we do that, as I said, we can forget other dimensions. So to what extent are the life events are reflected in characters and themes? These are one of the questions that is put in the biographical approach. Key questions. How far is the biographer justified in using evidence of the works themselves for his purposes? We are talking about justification. How far are the results of biography relevant and important for understanding the works themselves? So the relevance, the justifications are very important, and how can we prove that in reading a piece of literature? Asking this question, I come to some remarks here. The relation between private life and work is not a simple relation. There are other elements that are introduced. Evidence also is sometimes absent in many works. And even if there are biographies, they become part of a whole work. We can read them in the totality of the work. A work of art forms a unity. Also, it is important that such criticism seems dangerous, as it can change influence, obscure, or limit the critical insight. That is to say, everything, every time we go to the author's biography in order to force the kind of interpretation. That's the danger of reading or using the biographical approach. So here it can blur the vision and the artistic value of the work. Putting these remarks, I come to some limitations. The first one is that the author's life does not completely show in the text. Other things apart. The text is not the author's life. There are other issues. The text does not completely show the complexity and choosing the life of the author. So the author wrote many pieces, so where the life of the author resides. The text also is not always about the author. It concerns ideas, people, and events. Evidence is absent, as I said. Text is not an important the writer's experience. It obscures the comprehension of the text. Yeah, sometimes it is much more dangerous because we don't really see the text, but we try to see something else, far from the text. When we adopt the biographical approach, we automatically go to some defects, as I would call them fallacies. And these say that would weaken arguments as opposed to valid reasoning. The first one is genetic fallacy or fallacy of origins, as we name it, or biographical fallacy. It is a mistake of putting text exclusively in relation to the author's life. We retreat from the work into the life of the author. Imaginary and intellectual figure of author may seem more definite than the text, and we merge fiction with author. Also, the intentional fallacy, we look for intention of the writer, and thus reduce and universal issues the text is meant to address. Seeing these fallacies and weaknesses, what are the possible alternatives? One of them is new criticism. In 1930s, the farmerist movement adopted a close reading of poetry, a poem as a self-contained, self-revision. Although they talk about poetry, they focus on the aesthetic object, and they have some figures like Richards, Alan Tate, Robert Penn Warren, Armstrong, and Empson, and Clint Brooks. Also, the formalistic movement, seen in the Russian formalism here, pioneered by Viktor Shklovsky here in dealing with defamiliarization, is that language of literature is different from that of real life. So we have to read the literature and the text by its own laws, regardless of other external factors. Roland Barthes is speaking about the death of the author, and he advocates liberating text from the author's life. A text should hold no special weight in determining the meaning of the texts, so he attacks the attribution criticism and adopts more text-oriented approach, interaction of reader, not the reader, and he calls the author as a scripter, that is to say, someone who simply collects pre-existing quotations, not able to create or decide the meaning of his work. It is the reader who is going to do that. It is in the decision of the reader. And I quote here Roland Barthes here, talking about the modern writer, scripter, is born simultaneously with his text. He is in a way supplied with the meaning which precede or transcend his writing. He is in no way the subject of which his book is the predicate. There is no other time than that of the utterance, and every text is eternally written here and now. So utterance here and now. That is to say, it is the reader who brings meaning to the utterance. What is an author? Following Barthes, Michel Foucault questions whether the text requires an author, and he considers the text as a space where the subject disappears. And he says the author is an indefinite source of significations which will fill work. The author does not precede works. He is a certain functional principle by which in our culture one limits, excludes, and chooses. In short, by which one impedes the free circulation, the free manipulation, the free composition, decomposition, and recomposition of fiction. And you can see it is the work of the reader to see the in between the lines here that are in the text. I end up with a few quotes here. The first one from Jenkins, the copy. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these stations must show correspondence identification between the author and the character. Emerson, transcendentalist writer, I can find my biography in every fable that I read. And the last quote by Jane Goldman, who says that there are numerous biographies of Woolf. Biography has been highly influential in shaping the reception of Woolf's work, and her life has been as much debated as her writing. I would recommend the following three, which represent three different biographic contexts and the range of positions on Woolf's life. Quentin Bell's Virginia Woolf, a biography, Lee's Virginia Woolf, and Brick's Virginia Woolf, an inner life. There is no true biography of Woolf, as indeed, but these three mark important phases in the writing of his life. Hot debate continues over how biographers represent her mental health, her sexuality, her politics, her suicide, and of course her art, and over how we are to understand the latter in relation to all the former points of contention. So it's difficult to see which point in the life's biography is much more determined in the work of art. Finally, the biographical approach is an approach. It is important, it can be adopted, but it is full of fallacies, and we have to be careful in using such approach. Thank you very much.